Hi, I'm Moth Mercer. I make videos online to educate or entertain, but to make a living, I'm a zoologist and a teacher. I've personally handled dozens of species of animals and assisted in multiple conservation efforts. I don't say this to brag or declare myself an animal expert, but just to say that I know a thing or two about a wide diversity of creatures. At least perhaps a little more than some of Hollywood's creatives. No offense. I thought it'd be fun to take a look at what beasts we see invented for pop culture and try to check where the fictional animal lines up with real-life anatomy, as well as where some creative liberties were taken. What better way to start off the series than with the first movie in one of the most popular franchises when it comes to creature creation, Star Wars. About half of Star Wars takes place on a desert planet, and since desert is actually the second most common type of climate on Earth, there's a lot of reference material. Xerocles, in general, that's the word for an animal that's adapted to live in the desert, they're adapted to minimize the effect of intense heat and sun and retain a lot of water. This is especially notable in reptiles, as they're cold-blooded, or more accurately ectothermic, and need to rely on the heat around them to keep their bodies a sustainable temperature. Usually a desert lizard needs to find cool places when it gets too hot, be it under a rock, burrowed underneath the sand, or just by any shadow it can locate. This need to always be thermoregulating would probably make a lizard like the stormtrooper's dewback a pretty bad choice when it comes to being a beast of burden. Hard to use an animal as a ride if you need to stop to cool it off frequently, and that's not even getting into how difficult it is to train squamates. Still, there are a few other ways lizards can cope with heat aside from seeking shade. Lots of lizards can actually change color, more than just chameleons, although chameleons are the lizards whose color change is the most notable. Various desert-dwelling lizards, including iguanids, will vary the amount of melanin they have in their skin depending on the time of day and the intensity of light. If it's too cold, they'll present more melanin to attract more heat. If it's too hot, they'll retract melanin to cool off. We never see dewbacks change colors on screen, but various artwork shows them with different shades, so maybe that's how they work. In terms of size, though, the dewback is awfully large for a desert lizard. Most desert lizards need to be tiny enough to fit under a rock and live off of lower amounts of food, and being bigger makes it a lot harder to cool down. The biggest living lizard, the Komodo dragon, can live in dry savannas but prefers dry tropical forests, where shade is plentiful. Still, varanids, like Komodo dragons, have been demonstrated to be able to adjust their heart rate to assist with thermoregulation, so being a varanid would come with an advantage, even if this massive size would be a distinct disadvantage. You might be wondering, didn't the biggest lizard to ever exist live in Australia? And you'd be right, that's the Megalania. But the Megalania, 1, lived in Australia over 50,000 years ago with a vastly different climate, and 2, its fossils have been found primarily in areas that even today are not deserts. But while lizards in deserts are usually small, it's not unheard of for mammals to get pretty big, which brings us to the bantha, the pack animal of choice for the sand people. The bantha are horned, thick-furred, very large ungulates. While you might initially think the thick, shaggy fur would be a bad idea for a desert, take a look at one of the biggest desert animals in the real world, the Bactrian camel. Fur like this can be thick enough to protect against the intense cold of a desert's night, but light enough to prevent overheating. As for the bantha's large size, fun, or maybe not so fun fact, the bantha is so big because it actually was portrayed by a real-life Asian elephant. On Earth, some populations of elephants in Namibia and Mali have become quite adept to desert living, not too far from Tunisia, the place where Lucasfilm filmed lots of Tatooine. Of course, Margie, the elephant in the bantha suit, whose scenes were actually shot in the much hotter Death Valley, California, wasn't nearly as accustomed, so she would throw off her costume to try to cool down, and good for her. Don't worry too much, though, as she didn't die from heat and actually lived nearly 2 decades after the film's release. Like, it's horrible, but it's not the most horrible story about an animal on a film set. But elephants, camels, and horned animals like muskox, cattle, and sheep all have a history of being domesticated, so the sand people definitely had the right idea. Now, to be this big, the herd would likely need to spend lots of time looking for vegetation, and probably the sand people would move around so that the animals could find enough food, rather than have the animals move around on the whims of the sand people. Therefore, you'd think bantha fodder would be quite valuable, but Jabba uses it as an insult to Han Solo? That's weird. But riding them makes sense, raising them makes sense, and anatomically they make sense. Ignore the blue milk, and these might be the most realistic animals in the movie. At least if we're talking about the original edition of Star Wars, they would be. The special edition of A New Hope added in these little guys, which I assumed were the previously mentioned in the film womp rats, They're not, as Star Wars is never easy, so these are actually called Scurriers. Here's a better shot from The Mandalorian. These guys look just like the average tiny desert mammal, especially resembling jerboas and bilbies. Bipedal locomotion, large ears for managing heat, and long snouts likely good for getting at bugs. The furless skin would be pretty dangerous in such a sunny place, but perhaps it's similar to a naked mole rat skin, and is actually resistant to thermal hyperaglesia. Even still, resistance to pain isn't resistance to harm, so these guys would definitely benefit from burrow life, or maybe covering themselves in dirt or sand or mud, even if we don't see that on screen. On the opposite end of believable is the Ronto, this mess of a creature. Both Legends, the old expanded universe materials, and current canon expanded universe materials have tried to come up with different theories for this, and neither makes too much sense. Legends describes it as a mammal, and gives it an overall elephantine quality in terms of behavior, with males even having a musk-like season. That doesn't seem too bad. Sure, the positioning of the cranium is a little odd, but hornless rhinos from the past, like the Paraceratherium, had long necks and thick bodies matching the Ronto, and the mouth even kind of looks a bit like the prehensile upper lip you see in black and Indian rhinos. And elephant taming, though incredibly difficult, isn't impossible. What's the catch? Well, both rhinos and elephants, which aren't super closely related but have very similar skin, usually only have a little hair, and since they're mammals, their skin is susceptible to sunburn. Elephants cope with this by using their trunk to throw dirt on themselves or wallowing in mud, which is how rhinos cope. Both also spend time in water. A Ronto being a mammal makes sense, but if it's going to be living on a planet with two suns, it needs to be protecting that hairless skin. And seeing as it doesn't have a trunk to grab sand and dirt like a desert elephant can, and its lifestyle as a draft animal wouldn't allow it to wallow in mud, it's hard to imagine a mammalian Ronto surviving for more than a couple of days in such intense UV radiation. Okay, what does new canon say is the Ronto's deal? Well, they retcon it to be a saurian, which is a broad classification including all reptiles, even the ones people don't want to call reptiles. They even have new artwork that reimagines the skin as scales. It's pretty clear they're going for a dinosaur vibe, which in terms of inspiration makes sense as the Ronto was partially based on the Brontosaurus. The problem with that is it's clearly not a reptile. The Ronto has external ears, hooves, and maybe even hair if we look closely, all three of which are mammalian attributes. It's a mammal, even if, as a mammal, it wouldn't make it. Last creature on Tatooine to cover is the Gerba, which I never even knew about until making this video, as it's certainly not in center stage. Oh, there it is, apparently. Wait, is that just an ox? Like, it looks like a Highlander cattle. Well, cattle are adapted for cold, not heat, but there are some breeds that live in hotter areas. The Red Fulani, the Swana cattle, and the Tipo Corora all do better than you'd expect given their species, though none of them have this thick fur. But, like I said, there are animals with really shaggy coats that do well in the desert. Now, we don't really see animals for the rest of the movie outside of one memorable individual. This is the Dianoga. Its tentacles are pretty standard for a cephalopod, and supplementary materials make it look like a typical octopus, save a few alterations. For one, there's only 7 tentacles. While there is an octopus called the 7-arm octopus, the name is misleading as it's just a case of one arm in males coiling out of sight. Still, random mutations can lead to atypical tentacle numbers, and it's not exactly beyond the realm of belief that a cephalopod could evolve to have 7 arms. The multiple beaks is also a little goofy, but again, not beyond the realm of believability if we're taking into account mutations. The most unusual thing is the eye stalk, which cephalopods don't have. Still, other mollusks, like snails and slugs, do. So anatomically, they're plausible. Ecologically, they live in sewers and garbage containers. While there are definitely plenty of living things that can thrive in toxic anaerobic sewage, including even a few types of small animals like hooks and roundworms, a macropredator like a cephalopod wouldn't. Interestingly, though, while doing research on this, I did find ancient Roman legends about octopus sewers, similar to modern legends about alligators in sewers. Equally improbable. Well, that's about it for actual animals. I didn't include sentient species, obviously, and if that's something you'd like to see me cover, let me know. Or if you'd like me to talk about the plausibility of a fictional animal from a different work of art, you can let me know that too in the comments. I'm Moth Mercer, and thanks for watching. Before I go, though, I do want to ask, and this is the first time I've ever done this, if you would subscribe to the channel. YouTube has apparently decided that my videos are popular enough to have ads, but unless I have 1,000 subscribers, I can neither receive money from them, nor turn them off. I didn't get into making videos to make money, and lots of my videos are about topics I will not make money off of. But I certainly don't want any money to be made off from me to go to Google. So getting to 1,000 subscribers would allow me to choose which videos of mine have ads, and allow me to potentially even see a little bit of income on my videos that are from my own personal perspective, or about issues that don't necessarily matter. If you have friends that like Star Wars, Marvel, old literature, or just video essays in general, I'd really appreciate it if you could share the channel with them. Well, thanks again, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.